Mustangs and Renegades, a modern-day Western.
Now, do you want me to be addressing the camera?
Okay, we're rolling. Michael Blake interview.
I had the honor to spend time with Michael Blake. His fierce stance to tell the truth on the plight of the wild horses was inspiring. His commitment to animal and environmental issues were a core part of his life. He greatly encouraged me to tell this story.
Universal Studios wanted me to do a screenplay on wild horses, and I've always loved horses, always been a rider, and so I went up to Nevada to do a little bit of research, and went out to the BLM and went out to a concentration camp where they brought wild horses, and that started everything. When I was in Nevada researching on wild horses, I was connected with the BLM in the beginning. At one point he said, "Do you want to see a real wild horse?" And everybody said yes, and he brought in an animal that had just been captured, a herd stallion. And I was, well, my mind was blown. I'd never seen anything like this before. He was so powerful. You know, I tried to cooperate with the Bureau of Land Management when I first started researching what was going on with wild horses, but as time went on, more and more information came in that was very, very negative about what they were doing. The man holding this horse's tail is the head of the capture group. He was hired by the United States government while he was under indictment for having hunted wild horses by airplane. His associates, except for this man, who was a BLM supervisor, witnessing what's going on, they would rope his back legs together, they would rope his front legs together, and they would tie a noose around his head to his front legs as well, and leave him on his side in the sun for as long as 24 hours. This kind of activity continues to this day.
I have the high privilege and the distinct honor in presenting to you the President of the United States.
In 2005, President Bush established the Energy Policy Task Force and appointed Vice President Dick Cheney chairman. The task force passed legislation that enables hydraulic fracturing, oil and gas drilling to exploit massive land areas.
Will we see natural gas rigs in the Disappointment Valley herd management area?
It's very possible. The Bureau of Land Management has chosen to lease that area. We have received applications. Once that lease is issued, they have the right to produce from that lease.
If you believe in change for America, then believe in change for America's wild horses.
We need to remind Americans that the public land is our land and should not be sold to the highest bidder. Wild horses are our heritage.
Wild Horse Annie, who saw a truck traveling down the road with blood coming out of the back of it and found out that wild horses had been captured and confined horribly. She started to focus on getting some legal resolution for these animals, and she did. And it was an incredible time because it made hunting them and slaughtering them illegal. And it was the one and only time in the history of the United States that we've had our wild horses protected.
It became such a hot-button issue and was starting to peak in the public consciousness that even writers, musicians, actors were going public to bring attention to the cause.
I do think that what's happening with this horses is definitely indicative of our mind space. I'm a huge movie fan from all the way back, and The Misfits, it introduced the concept of the free-roaming horse, and out of that movie came the Free-Roaming Horse and Burro Act, which is what we have now today.
Once she is exposed to the cruelty and the humiliation for the animals that's involved in this capture, Arthur Miller's screenplay has her running off across the desert, turning around and screaming back,
"Murderers! You liars! All of you liars! You and your God's country! Freedom! I pity you!"
That's when movies are really their most useful, when they educate people. And this was really the first time that people were even cognizant that this was existing amongst us.
Free-Roaming Wild Horse and Burro Act was passed unanimously due to this letter campaign from the people. It reflects directly the will of the people. It is the U.S. government at work the way it ought to be at work.
The horse is the missing link. You know, it is the highest, it enabled them to make the highest expression of nomadism. And with the horse, they were free to range 1,000 miles in every direction. The horse and the man were one entity on the plains.
Everything has a spirit, and this is why we have to take care of everything around us. We have to realize that these animals are here for a reason.
The symbol of the cowboy's freedom is a symbol of that we pretty much look at America and think, well, hell, we're free. And the horse looks like he's probably a little more free than we are.
I attended the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board meeting in Washington, D.C. They make crucial decisions regarding the wild horses. Most of their members are connected to big business. Many concerned citizens were shut down trying to express their concerns. It was obvious this was a staged event. At the BLM Advisory Board meeting, Sally Spencer demanded that I sign a lengthy legal document restricting my rights as a documentarian. She seemed very concerned about what I may show and tell in my films.
Sally Spencer has sold over 1,700 horses in the last 3 or 4 years to Tom Davis. No organization knows anything about where the horses are going. All we know is that they get delivered to a place on the Mexican-American border where is a border crossing where horses are taken for slaughter.
Tom Davis became a buyer of wild horses in 2008 and was aided by Sally Spencer, the BLM's sale director in Washington, D.C. In 2009, 2 weeks after Colorado Senator Ken Salazar became head of the Department of the Interior, BLM started sending Davis truckload after truckload of wild horses from all over the West. In 2015, the Office of the Inspector General released an investigative report on the wild horses sold to Davis. As it turns out, Secretary of the Interior Ken Salazar is a neighbor of Tom Davis in the San Luis Valley of Colorado. The report confirms that Davis profited by selling the wild horses to slaughter.
There's probably a real feeling that they don't really have to enforce things as far as the wild horses go. That's why you see these horses going across the border into Mexico for slaughter. There's just too much evidence there that tells you in your gut, you know they're not doing their job.
After Traveler was rounded up and removed to the Canyon City processing facility, we were deeply concerned that he would end up in the slaughter pipeline.
You know, I think we ought to slaughter him because people can eat them, and so I think it's a good thing to slaughter. Totally against not slaughter.
The very notion that the wild American horses will be slaughtered as a food source of foreign gourmets has struck a chord with the American people.
There was a lot of talk of horses going to slaughter in Mexico, so I had to go see for myself. Santa Teresa is notoriously known as a horse port of entry into Mexico for slaughter-bound horses from the United States. A sizable number of horses had just been unloaded from 2 semi-trucks. This really makes one wonder what is happening to our wild horses when they go to these long-term holding facilities. Are they slipping out the back door to slaughter? When people learned Traveler was in the Canyon City holding facility, they took action. Fran Ackley of the BLM was kind enough to listen to people's concerns. Approximately 1 month after Traveler's roundup, removal, and permanent separation from his family, he was returned to Disappointment Valley. Traveler was the first horse to be processed into captivity and then released back into the wild. The BLM set a key precedent with this action, showing that returning horses to the wild is a legal and practical solution to relieving the financial burden of the long-term holding facilities. In 2013, the National Academy of Sciences completed an 18-month study of the BLM's wild horse and burro program. They could not identify a scientific purpose behind the BLM's arbitrary population limits and cited that the BLM allocates resources unfairly. Eight months after the Bureau of Land Management rounded up the horses of Disappointment Valley, the area in which they roamed was staked out with over 100 uranium mining claims.
It was just heartbreaking to go out there and see these stakes. As soon as you entered the preserve, much of that area where there's so much activity on Bureau of Land Management land is around the Disappointment Valley, around the area where the wild horse herds are moving around.
The game plan is to mine uranium from Disappointment Valley and process the uranium ore at the proposed uranium mill in Paradox Valley.
The activity in the region is massive. Uranium claims made under the 1872 mining law, which allows anyone to go out and start staking claims and hoarding up federal lands on the prospect that there might be valuable minerals there.
These lands are in distant, isolated, wonderful, scenic, solitary, quiet spaces. And now they're being cut up and dissected and cannibalized to feed the nation's energy appetite.
These are government projects. These are heavily subsidized projects. They're more akin to an old Soviet-style development than they are anything that resembles what people who are trying to formulate a sustainable way of living on the landscape would do.
With each discovery, it became clear that the BLM strategy and tactics had been going on for decades. What I had witnessed in Disappointment Valley with the Spring Creek herd was typical of the BLM's playbook. In fact, the next valley over in Natarita offered a cautionary tale, shedding light on what was likely to happen in Disappointment Valley and the Spring Creek herd. The town of Natarita, Colorado still suffers from the last mining boom and bust. In the 1980s, with the deregulation of environmental safeguards under President Ronald Reagan and Director of the Department of Interior, James Watt, Natarita Ridge, just outside of town, had thriving herds of wild horses up until the last uranium boom. The Natarita wild horse herd was zeroed out, and massive uranium mining took place. By the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, the 1971 Wild Horse and Burro Protection Act made this move illegal. The Department of the Interior and mining companies promised there would be little environmental impact. Just the opposite came to pass. The community suffered increased rates of cancer, and the area was left an environmental disaster. All these years later, the area, currently tagged by the government as a toxic Superfund site, is still extremely dangerous to animals and humans. Since most of the wild horses have been taken away, I decided to cover the public hearings on the proposed uranium mill and mining. Energy Fuels Resource Corporation was applying for a special use permit for its Pinyon Ridge Mill facility, located near Natarita, Colorado. At the first public hearing I attended, CEO of Energy Fuels, George Glacier, wanted to shut down my filming.
The presenters have asked not to have this filmed, and we would like to respect that request.
Why do you not want this filmed?
Well, the only reason
Will you change your mind?
If you film this thing and we don't have people there, you show this film to somebody and we don't have anybody, the experts, to answer questions, you might generate questions that can't be answered on the film.
There's been a series of hearings where Energy Fuels, an Ontario corporation, fronted by a lawyer who's passing as a rancher, George Glacier, who's moving this through, and he's already making large sums of money from just the promise of this mining.
Word was out about the new uranium boom. People for and against the proposal attended a series of public hearings from 2008 to 2009.
I am here today to oppose the proposed special permit sought by Energy Fuels to open uranium vanadium mill at the Pinyon Ridge Mill facility. It is well known that uranium milling and mining is hazardous to human health. This fact is well supported by scientific and medical literature. The National Academy of Sciences concluded in 2005 that there is no safe dose of exposure to ionizing radiation emitted by uranium and its byproducts. We know that uranium is hazardous to human health through both radioactive and direct chemical properties. It is a heavy metal, and ingesting it through contaminated food or water can lead to many illnesses, including kidney and lung diseases, the worst of which is lung cancer. I am here today as a physician and a member of this community who does not want my family nor my patients and neighbors exposed to this toxic waste.
We're connected throughout this region through air. Unfortunately, what goes up with moisture comes down. Also, what goes up with radioactive and heavy particles is what comes down with that precipitation. So we're not just looking at the footprint of 640 acres at the mill site. We're looking at potential contamination and effects and impacts on an entire region.
I've worked at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in reactor safety. I've been the librarian of the NRC's Reactor Safety Committee's library. One thing that they told me that you don't want to do is have a uranium mill in your community, no matter how desperate you feel your community is.
I see this mill as a huge opportunity for me. And like so many other kids my age, we want to work. Give us something to do. There's really no incentive for young men my age to be here because there's just not enough jobs.
We're tired of being unemployed. We're not trust fund babies. We're here just to make a living.
I'm a big believer in the jobs it'll create. I clearly want it.
My members want it, the people we employ want it, and I encourage you to support it. Thank you.
These energy booms have a way of destroying those communities. It's kind of like overexpanding a balloon. It may or may not come back at the end of the boom bust, or sometimes it pops and it's all gone.
Shareholders have a huge say in the behavior of all public companies. Energy Fuels is not even listed on the United States, any U.S. exchange. Energy Fuels does not have a corresponding ADR, which is an American Depository Receipt. It is not held in any portfolio of any U.S. traded mutual fund or ETF. That tells you something. More important than anything is that the U.S. investor, small or large, does not have access to invest or have any say in the behavior of this company. Right now, investment in the stock would require opening a Canadian account and buying stock for a global trading account, not exactly U.S. friendly. This is too important an issue to be farmed out to a foreign company.
The community was polarized. There were so many hard-working, unemployed people in the area, and they desperately needed jobs. Citizens who made their living from tourism and agriculture were very concerned about health issues and public perception. Environmental attorney Travis Stills has been litigating against the extractive industries for years.
We just received 20,000 pages of information about this area that had been withheld unlawfully by the Bureau of Land Management until the threat of contempt was put on them.
Travis showed me the uranium Superfund site just outside of Durango, Colorado.
Behind us is the tailings. Something over 95 to 98% of what you take out of a mine will be actual waste. So you'll have hundreds and hundreds of trucks going up and down the road each day. All they do is stockpile ore in these trucks and they run them down the road with a cover on them, just like you do a regular gravel truck. And the history is that they don't get cleaned up. By the time the cleanup comes, the company's bankrupt, out of business, or moved on. Because at the end of the day, the Department of Energy will manage these. They, meaning the companies, will no longer be around by design. I'm not casting aspersions. That's how it's designed.
I traveled out to the small town of Paradox and interviewed Reed Hayes, a former Atlas uranium mill worker.
People I know that personally have died in the mill in Moab, Utah: Ray Anderson, Ted Izzo, Henry Beatty, Andy Stamer, George Haida, Curtis Freeman, Sarah Folrain, Gail Tibbetts, Lou Painter, Keith Barrett, Dick Thompson, Lonnie Titus, Harry Ellis, Wallace Winter, Ike Shue, Ernie Carlucci, Lonnie Oliver, Dave Schaffner, Ken Olson, and Dick Stevens, all of cancer.
We'll probably repeat history in the sense that the uranium miner issues that happened in the 50s, the federal government knew, the state government knew, and the companies knew. The miners weren't told. They withheld the information from them concerning their health impacts. And I suspect that that's probably the case now, where quite a few people do have an idea of what is going on and what the threats are, but it's not being translated into decisions, public policy, or any way that we can make decisions for ourselves here in the West.
Why was there such a push for this uranium deal? Who was behind it? Before a company can begin extraction on public lands, an environmental impact statement, or EIS, is made. If wild horses are in the area, advocates will want to protect the wild horse environment. This could be problematic for extractive industries. Energy and mineral industries don't want the public to see any violation of safety and environmental codes, especially when they want to greenwash their industries. As I traveled to many of the western states trying to get a deeper understanding of the issue, it became clear that what was happening in Disappointment Valley and to the Spring Creek herd was not an exception, but the rule.
I moved out to Crescent Valley, Nevada in September of 2002. And about 10 days after I moved out there, the BLM came in about 4:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning. They had about 50 armed agents and helicopters, ATVs, semis, fuel trucks. They were shutting down county roads. If I hadn't been there to witness it myself, I don't know that I would have believed the force that they came with to take cows from two grandmothers.
With the help of attorney Julie Fischel, the Western Shoshone have been trying to stop the BLM from permitting the world's largest gold mining company, the Barrick Gold Corporation, based in Toronto, Canada, from mining on or near to Mount Tenenbaugh. The mountain is sacred to the Western Shoshone and fundamental to their creation stories and worship.
And these companies are very good at dividing and conquering. I mean, it's an age-old war tactic. They're pitting local people who are just out there trying to earn a livelihood against the Indian people, because that keeps all of us on the ground fighting. These guys work on long-term plans. It might be a 20 or 30-year plan, and you have different stages. I mean, first we got to get the animals off, and we got to have a good reason for it, so it sells to the public. So let's look 5-10 years down the road. I mean, I think there's a pattern there, and I think it normally links right back to the extractive industries and the politicians who are propped up by continuing this industry.
After years of legal battles with Julie's help, the United Nations ordered the BLM to halt all actions against the Western Shoshone people, a mandate that has largely been ignored.
West Douglas herd is being zeroed out, is the term, because of the oil and gas activity.
They have zeroed out the burros. I mean, we caught them. I mean, that was our job. They hired us to go do them, and I hated it.
Why is the U.S. government so hell-bent on getting these horses off public land? The roundups could be connected to a planned gas pipeline.
It has obvious implications not only for wild horses, but also for other kinds of wildlife. The route could have gone through an area of land that is already disturbed. It would have cost BP and the El Paso company a lot more money to build it that way, but it would have been much better for the horses, much better for wildlife and the environment. BLM is the one that signed off on the route that went right through the horse areas.
BLM is denying all of this, saying they are removing these horses for their own benefit.
We're going to see horses that are going to become totally extinct one day. They're going to be kind of like the buffalo. Really honestly feel that this is the goal of the BLM to eventually load up every horse that's on this pasture and haul it off.
In August of 2009, concerned citizens, the Northern Cheyenne and Crow Nation came together to pray and hold ceremony for the wild horses and Mother Earth. After the ceremony, David and I did extensive riding in the Pryor Mountain Wild Horse Range. The range was in amazing condition, and the nearby mining operation was going full speed ahead. We experienced heavy surveillance. Law enforcement was everywhere, hoping we would make a mistake.
That's the only advice I could give you.
The night after we finished a beautiful ride, I received a phone call from a man claiming to be a Hollywood producer. He said he had heard I was in the Pryor Mountains and he wanted to buy some footage from me right away. I found this very suspicious. Hardly anyone knew I was in the Pryor Mountains. If they could buy footage from me and claim I was not filming under a commercial filming permit, then they would arrest me. I decided I needed to talk with somebody currently in office, so I went back to D.C. to talk with members of Congress. U.S. House of Representative member Congressman Grijalva, as chairman of the House Subcommittee on National Parks, forests, and public lands, he issued a report that accused the Bush administration of pursuing, and I quote, a concerted strategy to reduce protection of federal lands, opening them up for every type of private, commercial, and extractive industry possible.
The BLM has been essentially inept at dealing with the issue of wild horses, and the consequence has been, despite the intentions of Congress, that it has been a policy of how do you exterminate and limit, as opposed to how do you manage. Resource decisions, whether it was moving a herd, diminishing a herd, not creating a wilderness area, they were made to see how quickly you could extract the profit from the public land.
The Office of the Inspector General's investigation into Mineral Management Service. Conclusion: a pervasive culture of exclusivity, exempt from the rules that govern. A culture of ethical failure. Further findings of OIG's investigations revealed mineral management employees accepting gifts, doing coke, and having sex with representatives of oil companies.
Gas and oil were given permits one right after another, categorical exclusions, which basically said we are going to supersede any laws in order to expedite. And so the public trust is not there. This is an American legacy. This is part of the history of the West. It's part of the history that goes back to conquistador times. And so for us to merely treat this as a species that is causing problems is a big mistake. The interior and agriculture, to some extent, having forest under their jurisdiction, have a very, very almost sacred responsibility in the management of our natural resources. The public lands and its inhabitants, wildlife, native plants, wildlife corridors, different kinds of species. It became something you could extract for profit. It became an imperiled development as they saw it.
I also visited governors at the state level. We did dozens of film screenings and political lobbying to educate and bring change for the wild horses. We delivered hundreds of handwritten letters to New Mexico's Governor Bill Richardson, former ambassador to the United Nations.
The American people all over the country have just written very passionate, heartfelt letters here, as well as foreigners. As we know, this will be a great success for tourism, ecotourism in this state.
Well, this is great.
I've been a huge fan of wild horses all my life. I think they're icons of the American West. I'm a horseman, not a great one. But I just believe our wild horses should be protected. And I'm getting a little tired of all the interplay with the federal government, with all these entities that want to control the wild horses. This issue's not over, and we got to do better.
Today, Sally Spencer from the BLM, she works in Washington, D.C., called me and said that before I show the film on Capitol Hill, that BLM must review it. And now it appears that my email has been hacked into. You might be connected to a computer that is pretending to be mail.mac.com and putting your confidential information at risk.
Following the Spring Creek Roundup, we did an educational screening at a school in Basalt, Colorado.
James, thank you so much for bringing it to our beautiful little school.
This man from the BLM was there to spy on a group of concerned citizens working to save America's wild horses. Here is some of the rhetoric the BLM reported from our screening. Despite BLM's efforts to thwart the screening to our nation's lawmakers, we proceeded. We delivered a strong message to members of the Senate and Congress in the LBJ room just off the Senate floor.
I hope and pray that this film will be instrumental in moving H.R. 249, the American Wild Horse Slaughter Prevention Act, through the Senate Committee of Energy and Natural Resources.
Overwhelmingly, the House of Representatives said for the second time, a whole new attitude and a whole new approach.
The legislation was designed to counteract what the Burns Amendment had proposed. The Rome Act was going to give protection back to the wild horses and burros so they could not be sent to slaughter. The bill then went to the Senate Committee of Energy and Natural Resources. These senators knew how important this issue was to the American people, and yet not one of them took any action to move the bill through committee.